The 1979 NBA season is a shining example of how much of a difference a year can make. 1 year earlier, the Bullets and SuperSonics were mired in an 18-day final series between two teams who failed to notch 50 wins apiece. A year later, those same two teams, armed with the best record in each of their conferences, squared off again, and with a new journey came a new destination. Welcome to the Pure Point Project. We are continuing our NBA in Hindsight series, looking back on all of the champions of the NBA's past. And today, we look back on the 1979 Seattle SuperSonics. My name is Jeff Blagden.
And I'm Xavier Barnett.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the NBA in Hindsight. Of course, as you just heard, the Seattle SuperSonics did indeed win this year, which, believe it or not, was the last time that a Western Conference team not from the state of California or Texas won an NBA championship.
Wow, that's that's an interesting stat. Seattle got their revenge on the Bullets from last year, and this time they closed the series out.
Yeah, and I said last time too on the top of the podcast when we were going through it that Seattle was the younger team and realistically had the better roster, but just kind of needed to piece together how to make it work as the younger team, with the Bullets being the far more experienced team, still having that core of Bobby Dandridge, Elvin Hayes, and Wes Unseld there, both in their early 30s, which coalesces or kind of compares to mid to late 30s in today's standards, based on how long players' careers tended to last. But yeah, the Sonics pulling it together the next year with that extra year of experience, and honestly, really, really, really after game one, looking like the better team.
Yeah, it was, one thing I noticed is that the Seattle SuperSonics kind of had like a little bit of hint of today's NBA with their transition on offense. It was pretty fun to watch, and like this time the shots actually, some of the shots that were taken weren't like off the foot or off balance. They actually had full balance, shot at the top of their jump. It was pretty fun to watch. I'm not gonna lie, it was enjoyable. This series.
The thing with Seattle compared to Washington, and I think a lot of it relates to exactly what you're saying, is that Seattle had relied really on a lot of their guard play, which wasn't something that a lot of teams did back then, right? A lot of teams were more focused on getting the ball inside to the big man, right? And I mean, they had Jack Sikma, who is a Hall of Famer, right? So it's not saying they didn't have the option to get it into the big man, but their two guards were just so much better than what the Bullets had in their backcourt. Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson, I mean, both two tremendous defenders in their era, both two big-time scorers for guards of the era, so they just really dominated this series, which is, at the end of the day, really a matter of coaching, because they saw that they had an advantage. Their advantage was their two guards were significantly better than the Bullets' two guards, and they focused on those two guards and they went to work. And the result of that is Gus Williams leading every single game in scoring for the Sonics and leading every game except for Game 5 in total scoring, right? And then, of course, with Dennis Johnson taking home the Finals MVP.
Yeah, and another thing, it's glad that you brought up the coaching. One thing that they tended to do, I don't know if this was new to people in 79, but they started double teaming and triple teaming because the coach kind of knew who the offense was, right? It's Bobby Dandridge or it goes to Elvin Hayes, right? So he kind of, whenever they went out on offense, he would kind of double team them a little bit or try to force them to make a shot which wasn't the greatest shot, right? So a lot of changes, it was very interesting.
They did, yeah, they adapted very well compared to the year before, especially, considering focusing on that backcourt. And I mean, I don't mean to leave out Freddie Brown either, another great backcourt scorer that actually came off the bench for most of the games here for the Sonics. So, all in all, just a tremendous backcourt, and they still had the frontcourt help. They had Jack Sikma, they had Paul Silas still there, even though he was a little on the older end at the time. They had made a trade in the offseason to acquire forward Lonnie Shelton, which was the only really big difference on either of these rosters compared to the year before was that Lonnie Shelton now joining the Supersonics rotation. At least additions that impacted their standard rotations in that, right? But yeah, with what you were saying, like more comparable to today's play, I think that has a lot to do with the focus on the guards in that, because in today's NBA, the guards are the guys, right? They're the big money
Yeah.
guys in the NBA today. They're the guys that do the fancy things that every fan wants to come out and watch, taking those threes, the ball handling, all that stuff, right? And back in the day, it wasn't really like that. It was a lot more focused on the centers and forwards. And of the stuff that we've gone back and watched so far, this is kind of the first time you really see that two dominant guards in any of these seasons, right? Because you had the earlier ones that we watched where Julius Erving swapped between the two guard and the small forward in that, but really played a lot of that, forward style game, right? Like
Hmm.
he was elbows and in, right? That was a lot of his style, right? Whereas even the big man on Seattle, you saw take some decent mid-range jumpers in that, right? Like Jack Sikma, especially in Game 5, was hitting some of those mid-range jumpers that were really making the difference in the game because they were letting him take those shots with the sacrifice of compared to at least letting him get inside the key or letting one of those guards drive into the rim, right?
Hmm.
So you saw Sigma putting up some of those mid-range jump shots, and I gotta say, it's funny to watch Sigma's jump shot coming back because Sigma had a good jump shot for a big man back in the day. Like he
Yeah, for
really he
sure.
really did. I mean, the
That's what
dude
I noticed too.
the dude led the NBA in free throw percentage once in his career. Like as a big man, as a center, a volume free throw shooter, right? Like he was 85% from the free throw line for his career. He was 32% from three. Of course, they didn't introduce the 3-point line until a couple years into his career, and it wasn't really kosher for big men to take them for a long time in his career. But near the tail end of his career with Milwaukee, when his athleticism started fading a bit, he started taking more of those threes and was hitting them at a really good rate for not just a big man back in the day, but for anybody back in the day in the late 80s to early 90s that he was doing that, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And the thing is, it was good that they kind of did take advantage of that because if I don't know if you noticed, but like he is way taller than Wes Unseld, like
Oh yeah.
insanely taller. So like him trying to like for all the good that defensively Wes Unseld is, like you can't defend that shot at that height. Like it was just the way he shot it. Like if it goes in, you can't really do anything. Like
Well,
that's the best you can do.
you have to take the choice, right? Do you let him take that shot, or do you risk him trying to get inside the paint? And the fact that Jack Sikmore is a really good passer too, right? So do you let him get into the paint, have one of those guards free up, and he makes the pass to one of those guards, or do you play off him and let him take that shot, right? And at the end of the day, taking that shot is probably the lower percentage thing to let him do, right? But unfortunately, he happened to be pretty good at taking that shot. And yeah, it's true. Like Unseld had the huge weight advantage, right? Like he had the muscle, he had the strength advantage in that, but Sigma was the taller guy, and it's really we see it with Kevin Durant today, right? It's really hard to deal with a jump shot from a guy who is tall, releases it above their heads, has a high release point in that, right? But the funniest thing watching him shoot today, or any of the guys back in the day shoot to me, is just how slowly the ball goes up to the rim and comes down in that compared to today. But what didn't do that was when you would see Jack Sikma make those inside passes where he'd get the ball on the baseline a few feet out and one of the guards would cut inside and he'd rocket the ball in there with a pass to them and they'd get it and put it up. And they did that a lot. That was one of their go-to plays throughout this series to get those guards involved.
Hmm. And there's a lot of those like slick one-handed passes. They're like passes were like bullets pretty much. They just like he sometimes the camera would it was hard for the camera to follow sometimes because you just kind of see they running up and then boom passes it to a guard and then they take a dirty shot and then yeah, easy points, or especially in transition. Holy, like it was a beautiful thing to watch Seattle with their transition on offense.
It's amazing the change from the year before, right?
Yeah.
When we're talking about could this team be the worst team ever to win a championship, and then you look at how it all clicks and comes together this year, and they kind of figure out their team, you know?
Hmm.
Because the year before, there was a lot of trying to force the ball into Sigma, right? There was a lot of trying to
Yeah.
get stuff to work with a team that wasn't really built around getting that stuff to work, right? But this time around, they realized that their guards were their advantage and were the better players, and they worked through the guards and let their offense be driven through those guards, and it really, really paid off for them in this series.
Yeah, it's all what a difference an off season can make, right? Like you noticed before in the last season was he was kind of brought on midway through the season, so he did turn the team around for what he did, right? Because they were like god awful at the beginning. I think they were like what 5-15.
You're talking
Uh,
Wilkins coming in?
yeah,
Andrew
Wilkins
Wilkins?
coming
Yeah.
in. Yeah, and then this year they go straight to a championship, right? They become first seed, and then just dominate through that guard play. Like that was the main difference. So it's nice to see a change. And
And
yeah,
are,
sorry.
are we 100% sure that Jack Sikma isn't Kyle Singler's dad? Because, like, they look like the same person. It's pretty ridiculous. I don't think I've ever seen two people that I can that easily mix up for this. I can only tell the difference because the footage is a little bit more grainy on Sigma because it's old tape. Um, in in both situations though, for both teams, both Washington and Seattle, the conference finals really gave them a rough time. In Seattle's case, a rougher time than Washington ended up giving them, right? That Phoenix series with Seattle going to 7 games, the Washington San Antonio series before that going to 7 games as well, which, of course, featuring league leading scorer George Gervin there in that game, and giving them a really, really hard time because that San Antonio team was a well built team as well. But you just look at the path that they took to get to the playoffs, and yeah, Washington and Seattle both get the first round bye, right? Because they do have the best records in the conferences in each of their respective conferences this time around. 52 wins there for Seattle and 54 for Washington, leading the West and East respectively. But you look at the playoff path that they had to take, and that missing that first series really didn't help Washington out too much. Played 2 7-game series going into it against two very, very talented teams. And then on Seattle's end, they face a Lakers team that is really, it's Kareem. It's a team that's trying to figure out their identity and figure out how they're going to shape themselves into that team that would become the team of the 80s the next decade coming up, right? When you really get Magic and Kareem clicking with each other. Of course, Magic taken in this year's draft, right, at the end of the season, to join the Lakers and really change that franchise around. And not only that, but Jerry Buss coming on board, purchasing the team, or Jim Buss, sorry, coming on board, purchasing the team and putting it under that ownership and that would lead it up until the present day, right? So they would really turn around afterwards, but at that point, not a great team still, right? They were Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and that's about it, right? So Seattle wipes the floor with them in 5 games, is on to the next round, faces a tough Phoenix squad, goes 7 games against them, while Washington is going 7 games against an arguably tougher San Antonio team. And then they come to the finals, and it really does kind of look like Washington shows their age a little bit, and that they do look like the more tired team. They put it all out there game one, right, and looked to have the series again game one, right, when they came out and really sort of dominated, right? But through at least much of the first portion of the game, it gets a little bit closer a little bit later as they kind of limit the scoring inside coming through the later half of that first game, and the Bullets only end up winning by 2 points, but the best they looked through the whole series, and then you really see it the next game, which came 4 days later, but they looked out of it. They looked tired. They lost by 10, but really it was a bigger loss than that, right? Like the number is closer than it looked as a game.
An actual game. Yeah, there's a lot of times where it looks like it was a close game, but they just kind of eased ease the gas pedal on the gas, right? So,
Yeah, some
um,
garbage time points in that there on the back end
yeah,
of it
right.
and stuff. Although the first, it's funny because you saw Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld looking really good during the first game. Come into game two, Elvin Hayes comes out in the first quarter and looks really good again. Looks like they're going to dominate possibly again. 11 points in the first quarter. Only scores 9 points throughout the rest of the game. So they did adjust and really play defense on him there, and I think that kind of turned it around there. And you see Washington try to adjust to that in Game 3 and the dominance that Seattle's guards had in Game 2 and 1 by moving Bobby Dandridge to the guard spot, right? And starting him at guard instead of putting him in at 3 spot. But the problem with doing that is you put a slower player onto either Gus Williams or Dennis Johnson, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, you then leave, no real help behind them that Bobby Dandridge was providing from the earlier games in the series, and it ends up helping a little bit, but nowhere near the push that they needed.
Yeah, and you kind of just see him blow by them. It's kind of like they weren't even there, to be honest. When with the speed of Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams, it's yeah, it was pretty much a sight to behold. Also, it's a shame because yeah, they kind of struggled from the field. I know in game 3 in the first like 5 minutes, the Alvin Hayes was only like 1 of 8 or 1 of 9, and they were just struggling to get field goals. And kind of West kind of held them together in game 3 with just his offensive board. So it's always a struggle, I find, if your leading guys are only having scored at such a low percentage, right?
Yeah, like you want your big guys to be more involved, right? Like your big
Yeah.
names. Yeah, definitely. Then we go into game 4 after 3, and it's really the best game of the series. By a pretty wide stretch, right? Like no team is really dominant for a long stretch of time. They both kind of go back and forth throughout the game. They split quarters. And it's just really tight all the way through. Goes into overtime. It's kind of more of that dominant guard play from Williams and Johnson. It goes on all series, but in this overtime period, you really see it where their stamina is just better than Washington's, right? And Washington's settling for more of these jump shots where the Sonics are still getting to the rim, missing quite a lot when they do so. Luckily, still hitting enough to take the game. But then there's also, which is understated, is Dennis Johnson coming in with all the blocks he had that were big blocks in this series, right? This one, he ended up with 4 blocks in game 4, I think, but the biggest one, of course, is with 4 seconds left on the clock, he blocks Kevin Gravy, the guard for Washington, and seals the victory for them on a shot that could have tied the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he had 2 blocked shots the game before at the out of the 2 guard position, and of course there was the phantom foul call in game 1 as well that Dennis Johnson got called on when Larry Wright was going to the basket. He had his shot blocked by Dennis Johnson. It was called a foul. So Wright got to go to the line, hit the 2 foul shots, and of course Washington only won by 2 points, right? So they end up being the 2 foul shots that win the game for them there at the end. Comes back, gets his revenge in game 4 by blocking Gravy to get them the series sort of almost defining win when they come in and win in game 5, the next one. But I feel like the momentum entirely shifted to Seattle there during that overtime period in game 4.
Yeah, for sure. Dennis Johnson was just a force to be reckoned with. I know we kind of sound like a broken record because we keep talking about the guard play, but yeah, the guard play was like
it was the
pretty
difference.
much, yeah, it was the main difference, and it can't be said enough. It was insane, and they were even the rebound, like Dennis Johnson in game 4, like his rebound, I think he had 10 rebounds in total. Like any had the points, any had 4 blocked shots. It's just it was insane. Like he was just all over the place. Wherever you needed him, he was kind of setting up the plays and getting it going and keeping drives alive and offenses alive as well, right? So it's it's to be said, right? It's this was Seattle pretty much evolving and going out under fire. I got a question. Do you think this was probably the best backcourt of the era, or
Mm, I still got to give it to the 73-74 Knicks with Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe. I think that's kind of probably the defining backcourt of that era, and possibly the best backcourt we've seen up until you get to like um, the late 90s and that, right? But definitely a great backcourt and arguably the best defensive backcourt that we may have seen in quite some time, not just in that era alone. Also, probably the most boring named backcourt. I mean, come on, Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson.
yeah, it was typical of the time. You know, what are you gonna expect? You know, we don't
You have
have.
no idea how many times that I am trying to say the one name and mix it up and say the other name by accident because they're just so. It's
So
Williams
similar.
and Johnson and Gus and Dennis. It's like I don't know. It's for whatever reason, it's just tough for my mind to differentiate those two.
Yeah, no, I was struggling too. I was just like, who again? Is it
Oh wait,
Williams or?
Gus Williams is the one with the bald spot. Okay, right. That's
Okay.
the.
Yeah, it's I don't blame you. It's crazy. Yeah. So Seattle, Gus Williams. I have a question. We're going a little bit ahead in a couple years, but apparently Gus Williams sat out in the 81-82 season. Because of contract disputes, and then this is because Seattle like was competitive for many years until I believe they traded Dennis Johnson too in 81 and 82. Do you think they would have still been able to compete and get another one, or just the Magic train and then the Larry Birds of the world, plus Michael Jordan getting involved in
It's it's
kind of.
it's it's tough through the 80s because teams start to just get so dominant, right? Like the Lakers, the very next season, right? The Lakers win 60 games and win the championship, right? And that's, Magic's rookie year, right? Like it's tough because you look at that team too, even just adding Magic, and I mean, I say just, but it's Magic Johnson. He's a
Yeah.
top 5 player in the history of the NBA, right? So they just add him to the team and you get Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson there alone. It's like, okay, well, right? And then, of course, Michael Cooper there, who's one of the most underrated defensive backcourt guys in the history of the league, right? Like this guy was a very, very good defensive two guard. And that's not even the best iteration of the roster, right? They continue to get better as they go on throughout the decade. And then, of course, the next season, you have the Celtics draft Bird, right? And then they start to build that roster, and you get Bird, McHale, Parrish, right? The teams just start getting so much better at the top, and I'm just not sure that Seattle, even if they kept everybody, would have had enough firepower to keep pace, especially considering, they're going to start to age in the middle of the decade in that, right?
Yeah, no, totally fair. It's just an unfortunate because maybe not 81, 82 is probably the beginning of the end, anyways. If they kept everyone, but it's always nice to see a little bit what ifs,
Mm-hmm.
kind of get an idea.
You look at the follow-up season, and they finished 56-26, which is a better record than it was the year before, right? They lose to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. It's a 5-game series. The Lakers really kind of dominate the series, but they are coming up off a rough 7-game series against the Bucks the series before, right? And then you go into 80-81, and that's where it kind of starts to unravel and crumble for them, right? They only get 34 wins that season. the team is just, you've got injuries to Lonnie Shelton, you've got, Paul Westphal comes in, but only ends up playing 36 games that season. It really does fall apart. They did bring in Vinnie Johnson, of course, which I have to mention just because I'm a Pistons fan, and in my mind, still a top 3 sixth man of all time in the NBA. But of course, he was starting, not playing sixth man. So that's where your problem runs in. But yeah, you really start to see them fall apart there in the 80s because of that. But 81, 82 again, they come back and they're a decent team again, but they're still kind of a shadow of their former selves. They come back from those injuries from before, and the Lakers are just still getting better, right? So yeah, it's tough with the competitive nature of the Western Conference as it would start to develop during that early 80s stretch.
No, that's totally fair. So that's why I asked. It's yeah, because pretty much the 80s is, everyone always says it's the Bird and Magic era, but like a lot of other teams were there as well. It's just it gets hard. Like the NBA gets like, it gets so competitive around like the West, like for other teams, right? It's just so, it's hard to be the best for a while.
The level of competition in the NBA period just starts to skyrocket in the mid 80s, right? They're just in the late 70s, you see, teams have one or two guys that are really good, right? And then they've just got a lot of role players on the roster for the most part, right? Guys that are there to fill specific roles, and that's it, right? But you get into the mid 80s and guys are expected to do more. Even those guys that are the 7th or 8th guy in the rotation are expected to contribute in some way. And that talent level is just going up and up and up to the point where the league starts to add more teams and all that too to try to balance it out and all that kind of stuff. And you really do see that the impact of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird popularizing the sport among youth and that too. And not only then, but we're also kind of seeing the impact of what Dr. J had done, right? Because all those kids that have grown up watching Dr. J play basketball, right, are now coming into the league. So you start to see that revolution of the super athletic guys, the guys who are the evolution of the cutting game, of the driving game, the evolution of the mid-range game to the point where for a large stretch of time, probably right from like 85 through 99, 2000, maybe into the early 2000s, the mid-range game is king, right? Like Michael Jordan becomes the best player on the face of the planet because of his mid-range game. Right? Clyde Drexler becomes one of the best two guards of all time because of his mid-range game, right? Larry Bird gets a lot of talk about being a good shooter from three-point range and stuff like that, but three-point shooting still wasn't very big, right? His biggest impact was still the damage he could do from that high post spot, right? So the mid-range game, the mid-range passing and that. So, and of course, Kareem and the skyhook, half the time is technically a mid-range shot, the position he's taking it from. So you really start to see Dr. J's kind of impact and influence in the style of all the players that start to come into the league.
Yeah, it's insane, right? The athleticism. So yeah, Dr. J, like we said before, very thankful for what he did for the NBA. I don't know if he virtually single-handedly himself got everyone saved the league, but people that thought he kind of started getting basketball a little bit more popular, and kind of like you said, was the driving force in getting the big athletics into the 80s, and then getting that mid-range game going, which I'm not gonna lie, I used to always prefer. When I was watching basketball, I was a mid-range fan, and a big smash and dunk, like a Shaq style dunk. I was also a big fan of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that he single-handedly changes things with that, but it's like he kind of does, though, in a way, in that the more extravagant, flashy style of basketball that we start to see, right? Because before Dr. J came into the NBA, the NBA was a lot of get the ball inside to your 7-footer, and it stayed that way for quite some time. And don't get me wrong,
Hmm.
get the ball into your 7-footer was a staple in the NBA up until like 2015, right? Up until Steph Curry started hitting 400 threes in a season, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it was a staple that won a lot of teams a lot of games and won a lot of teams championships, right? But Dr. J was the first iteration of that sort of flashy style, and it's not like he was the first person that could do it. It's just that he was the first person given the real opportunity to do it, right?
Hmm.
Because he goes to the ABA where they're more focused on that flashier style and that, right? And on getting those highlight reel dunks and all that kind of stuff, right? And and he has that kind of leverage when he gets pushed into the NBA, and then his first season there shows that it can win games in the NBA that way too, right? And I think you have the
Hmm.
impact of those things, and then it to kind of an even wider arm of it, like a more extent of it. You see Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams dominating in this series, and I'm not sure. Lenny Wilkins is a new coach at the time, right? It's only his second season as a head coach, so you got to think his influences are going to be more towards the younger generation, right?
Hmm.
Which was the more flashier style in that, right? So you kind of see the first season when they lose to the Bullets, they try a lot of that smash mouth, get the ball inside, try to get the bigs to score, right? And then the second
Yeah.
season, his first full season as a head coach, so his first season really establishing his own system there, and they focus on the guards and that flashier cut to the rim style of play that Dr. J really first kind of popularized, where you have your wing guys going to the tin and trying to get those layups and trying to play big, even though they're the smaller guys on the court.
Yeah. No, it's totally a testament. A lot changes, and it's always great to kind of see the evolution of the league. That's why we're looking at this in hindsight, right? But yeah, seeing the evolution from feed it to the big man, and then kind of okay, let's take advantage of these guards. There's not the only way to score. There's other methods that we could do to kind of score and still be competitive at the same time. So yeah, it's I agree. It's a great difference, and we're seeing the evolution of how basketball works.
Yeah, and then you see the continuation as Magic comes into the league as a 6'9" point guard, right? Which is
Yeah,
just
insane.
unheard of at the
Cheat
time,
code.
right? There was, at the time it was like the idea of a tall guard was Oscar Robertson, and Oscar Robertson was only 6'5", right? And that was considered mind-bogglingly tall for a point guard, right? So Magic coming in, and it shows that kind of change in a way, right? I'm not saying that Dr. J is the reason Magic Johnson played basketball the way he did, but it definitely influenced him, right, coming into the league. And you see, you can't help but think that a 6'9" guy is probably playing power forward, maybe small forward, but probably power forward if it's not for Dr. J, right? So do we really get this version of Magic Johnson if not for that, right?
Yeah, no,
It,
that's a good question.
it's funny too because even kind of the way Larry Bird played, right? He played small forward, sure, but he played a lot like a point guard as well, right? So you start to see those kind of the more skill oriented wing guys come into the league. And I know point guard isn't technically a wing guy, but let's be honest, the first two seasons Magic Johnson really played two guard more than he played point guard, right?
Hmm.
So before they realized, this guy's the best point guard of all time. Who cares if he's 6'9"? Why are we playing him at the two?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think height has a good reason why Johnson was so dominant, but yeah, his basketball IQ is just pretty much second to none as well, right? He's just
I mean,
uh
if Magic Johnson was 6'3", he'd still be a Hall of Famer. Like it's not,
yeah,
his
yeah,
his skill
no.
set was impressive, but it did, the fact that he was 6'9" allowed him to do some of the more impressive feats that we see in his career, like
Hmm.
playing both point guard and center in an NBA Finals series, right?
Yeah.
Um, And of course, the rebounding numbers aren't going to be what they are if he wasn't 6'9", right? There's a few seasons when he was up over 8 rebounds per game, around 9, and that at the time, he was a lot like what we see of Russell Westbrook, right? Except, he was also a winner. Um,
Is that a little bit of a
um,
stab, I hear?
well, I mean, he was the Mr. Triple-Double of his era, right?
Yeah.
You have Oscar Robertson, and then you go to Magic Johnson, and then you get a brief little Grant Hill spurt before you go into LeBron James as your Mr. Triple Doubles coming through, right? And then of course Westbrook. So Magic obviously 6'9" helps him with those rebounds and that, but the passing was just on another level compared to what we'd seen, and it was fancy passes but accurate. It was like what Pete Maravich was doing, except he passed because he wanted to win, not because he wanted to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
So
No.
it's and to that extent, obviously that's not the way Dr. J played. Dr. J was a scorer first, obviously, but I still have a hard time thinking that we get to a point where Magic Johnson is moved to point guard in his 4th season in the NBA, if it isn't for the impact that Dr. J has.
No, fair enough. That's a very good point. Yeah, no, it's that's a great concept because I never really thought of it that way. I always just kind of thought, oh, Magic Johnson, he's just good because he's good,
Well, it's like I said. It's like I said. He is still good, right? Like, he would be playing in the NBA. He would be playing in the NBA at some position, no matter what, right? Like, even if he was a power forward, he'd still probably go down as one of the best power forwards of all time if he came into the league and had to play power forward, right? He was just that good. That was his talent level, right? But I feel like there is some influence there that holds over on that. But to get back to the actual team that won the championship that year, because we'll be talking a lot about Magic Johnson on the next one of these, I'm certain, considering. But in this game, we see a different pair of guards, as we said before, excel, and really change the course of this game. And even with Washington, it kind of starts to get sad a little bit at the ends of game 4 and 5 because they do start to look so tired and just everyone starts fouling out. And it's kind of the end to a really good era of Washington basketball that, unfortunately for Washington fans, we don't see again, probably until Gilbert Arenas.
I mean, if you count, I guess if winning's not important, yeah. Winning, I meant.
I mean, I did preface it by saying if you're a Washington fan, right? So obviously, if you're a Washington fan, then winning's not very important to you.
Wow, shots fired. But yeah, it's not. It hasn't been. I don't think Washington's ever been the same since. I don't think. I don't think anything's going to change in the future as well. I don't think Wall and Beal are the ones that are going to carry them to the promised land either.
If John Wall could be healthy at any point during Bradley Beal's career, that'd be a pretty good team.
Yeah. The problem is they're in the worst spot in basketball as well, where they're they're not totally awful, they're not god awful, and they're not good enough to be a competitor either, right? It's they have to get lucky and maybe get a Giannis in the draft or something, but other than that, I don't see it going their way.
You look at after that finals loss, and it really just. Before that, they were a perennial playoff team, a perennial conference finalist a lot of times, if not NBA finals, right? And then the very next season, they win 39 games. The next season, 39. 43, 42, 35, 40, 39. To get stuck in that, just like you said, that middle spot for so long where they're just a bottom end playoff team, but only because there's so few teams in the league,
Yeah.
right? Like they go a stretch where they have they lose in the Eastern Conference Finals the first round of the Eastern Conference 5 years in a row, right? It's pretty much what the late 2010s to the late, what do you call it? Pre-2010s, the late 2000s, but then that makes it seem like you're
Yeah.
talking about like 2090 or something.
We don't have to worry
But
about that until we're
right,
till that time, right?
the late 2000s, early 2010s, when you see like the Pistons kind of do the same thing, right? Where they're perennial contenders for a while, they win a championship, and then they just get mired in the middle for a stretch of about 5 or 6 seasons. It's just the most difficult spot to get out of, right? And it takes Washington a while to get out of it. You could say they get out of it the way that you don't want to get out of it in the 91-92 season, when they dropped 25 wins and then go 22, 24, 21, right? Where they're just terrible for a stretch. But then they get back up and into the middle again when they come up with those Chris Webber era teams, when they got the idea to build like the Knicks are building right now, where they just sign all the power forwards they can possibly force onto their roster, and then get Rod Strickland and think that that's going to make the difference in winning them a championship. And then, of course, mired in mediocrity again, right up until the present day.
Yeah, it's a tough franchise to be a fan of, and
The toughest part is that there's so many promising moments when it's like, oh, we're going to start to get good now. Okay, never mind.
no, we just yeah. And the worst thing about it is like their win is considered one of the worst wins ever. On top of that, it's like it's tough being a fan, right? But who knows? One day, sometimes the team will get better and go into the promised land. Like sometimes some teams kind of just pop up slowly and out of nowhere, like the Golden State Warriors. They were in that middle spot, switched the coats, and then they kind of had a little bit of a dynasty in the late 2010s. So, yeah, it's. I wonder if, and another thing I want to go, kind of going all over the place here, but like the Seattle SuperSonics, that NBA team has a championship, and they still moved the team, which is crazy to me.
Well, moving the SuperSonics is one of the most egregious things the NBA has ever done. It had a huge fan base in Seattle, and there's still a huge basketball fan base in Seattle, right? That's why very likely within the next few seasons, well, I don't know now with the COVID impact on the NBA's income, but within the next few seasons, it was expected that we were going to see another Seattle team, and it was very likely going to be named the SuperSonics. But for some reason, they just decided we're going to move this team out basically just because OKC had an arena and Seattle wasn't willing to fork over enough money to build a new arena.
Yeah, which is insane, And, Seattle fans have never been the same since,
It really shows you how much it really is driven by money in this league.
Yeah.
Because the SuperSonics organization was not a bad franchise, right? They were competitive for most of their existence, right? Like, especially up to the point when they moved, right? Like, they won that finals, but they didn't really disappear, right? They were mired with injuries the next season and they dropped off, but then they get back up to when they're, high 40s team. They drop off for a little bit, but then get right back up there to where they're high 40s. Then they get into the 50s again, as you see the Gary Payton, George Karl, and Detlef Schrempf, Sean Kemp years come in, right, when they're really competitive through the mid to late 90s, but are stuck in a league that has the Michael Jordan Bulls, right, where you see them They make some runs in the playoffs. They put up a lot of wins. They have in the 90s. Seattle has 360-win seasons. They've got 550-win seasons, right? They only have one season where they're 500 or worse. Well, two seasons where they're 500 or worse, and both of those are just right at 500, right? So they don't finish under 500 the entire decade. In fact, they don't finish under 500, from the period from 1987 all the way to 2003. They don't finish under 500, right? And then they have one bad year, which is ridiculous when you consider, and then they draft Kevin Durant and they're right back on top again and then get moved to Oklahoma City.
Yeah, which is crazy. And then they called the Thunder. I think I like Supersonics more than the Thunder for a team name. Just makes me kind of think of Sonic a little bit, or like an attack. But yeah, it's crazy to think, like, well, it's a storied franchise, right? It's got a lot of history to it, and they just moved it just like that because of.
They should have moved the Bobcats to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Just make the Bobcats the Oklahoma City Thunder and keep the Sonics in Seattle.
Yeah. It's I don't think that are they even called, what are they called? They're called the
Hornets now. They're back
now.
to the Hornets again because New Orleans decided to switch their name to the Pelicans. So they're like, hey, we can be the Hornets again.
Yeah, that's the worst team name I've ever heard. I'm sorry, the Pelicans. It's like the logo's awesome.
It's sad because I love the font that they use on their jerseys and the colors that they use, the color of and it's so New Orleans, the font and the colors and all that stuff that they picked. It's so perfect for New Orleans, but it had to be the freaking Pelicans.
Yeah, that's not. Out of all the birds to choose, they picked the Pelicans. Like that's worst. That's probably up there in worst team names in sports.
If not worse, at least intimidating.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Because it's like, we got the Raptors playing off against the Thunder, and then tomorrow they'll go and play the Pelicans.
Yeah. Ooh.
So yeah, right. Well, but when you think about it, the NBA really has some of the most uninspired kind of team names, right? Like starting from the top, like if I go down the list of the standings for this year in that order, right? The Bucks, not really an intimidating animal. The Raptors, all right, it's a dinosaur, yeah, okay. The Celtics, I mean, okay, like it's a leprechaun. I mean, yeah, okay. It makes sense, but it's not exactly intimidating. The Heat, I'll take that. That's okay. Fire, right?
Yeah, fire.
The Pacers, whatever the fuck a Pacer is. The 76ers are literally named after a number.
Yeah.
The Brooklyn Nets, okay. The Magic, Wizards, Hornets,
the Magic and the Wizards.
Bulls. There we go. We got Bulls. That's all right. That's an intimidating animal. I'll take Bulls. I guess Hornets is fine, but like they're so easy to crush, right? Like they're tiny in that.
Yeah, but they can kill you, dude.
They can, but a cow can kill you. It doesn't mean I'm going to name my franchise after it to try to intimidate people, right? The New York Knickerbockers, like come on, it's literally a pair of underwear.
Yeah,
I mean, the Detroit Pistons. I'll forgive it. I'll forgive it because Detroit is Motor City, Pistons, it works, it fits. For the same reasons I'm forgiving Celtics with Boston, I will forgive the Detroit Pistons.
That's just the bias.
Atlanta Hawks, okay, I'll take a Hawk.
It's a better bird. It's a better bird than a Pelican.
Intimidating enough. Cleveland Cavaliers, that's okay. I'll take Cavaliers. Lakers, I mean, there's not even any lakes in Los Angeles. I mean,
there's an ocean.
Why didn't they change the name when they moved from Minneapolis? Minneapolis had lakes. Then they moved to Los Angeles, and the name no longer makes any freaking sense whatsoever. The Los Angeles Clippers, I mean, I guess it's technically named after a boat, which, okay, but whatever.
I just think of cutting your hair, so.
Yeah, I think of a pair of scissors, to be honest. Like the Denver Nuggets.
Well, gold nuggets, but gold isn't intimidating. Everyone wants gold, so.
I suppose for the same reason that I have to forgive Boston and Detroit, I have to let Denver go for
Yeah,
that.
that's true.
Same with Utah, the Jazz, the same reason I kind of have to let them go because it does
Yeah,
fit the franchise. The Thunder, that's okay. The Houston Rockets is okay.
yeah,
Dallas Mavericks is all right. I'll take Mavericks.
yeah. It's
It's
okay.
Memphis Grizzlies is fine. It's an intimidating
Yeah,
animal. The
badass.
Portland Trail Blazers, I mean,
No. Unless that has something to do with the city. Uh, but
maybe
does it
it
have a lot
does.
of trails?
Did Portland blaze a trail? Is Portland the first of something? I don't know. I don't know enough about the history of Portland, considering
They
there's
smoke marijuana on their
706
trails.
Portlands in the USA. Sacramento Kings. I'll take Kings. Kings is acceptable. San Antonio Spurs. This is right on the borderline of what I can accept for the same level as Detroit, Toronto, or Boston. Because, like, yes, it fits, but it more fits Texas as a whole. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's not an intimidating object whatsoever. But I guess I kind of, to not look like a hypocrite, have to let that one go. The Phoenix Suns, it's
That one's a tough.
it's fitting, and I mean, it's a big ball of fire in the sky, so
It's super hot in Arizona, right? And it's dry, so I
no,
can.
it fits with Phoenix for sure. So I'm just wondering whether I accept it on both levels or not. But
Yeah.
the Minnesota Timberwolves, that's fine. Timberwolves, I'll take. Golden State Warriors, a little cliche, but fine. It's fine,
Warriors.
right? I mean, at least it's not the Wildcats. It's not that cliche.
That's true.
But yeah, I don't know. The Supersonics, for the record, is decent. I'll take Supersonics. It has something to do with sound, which is what Seattle's really known for, right? Music and all that kind of stuff, the grunge movement and that. And Supersonics, okay, it rolls off the tongue. I like it.
Sounds like a Pokemon attack. Well, it is a
It
Pokemon
is. I
attack,
mean,
so.
if we were gonna start naming teams after Pokemon attacks, I mean that's.
Yeah.
um,
To be fair, it was named that before Pokemon came out, so it's not their fault.
oh my god. Anyway, I think we've talked about as much about this series and random other stuff as we can talk about before we head into our first review of the 80s when things start to get a little bit more exciting, I should say, in the world of the NBA. Not that this wasn't, because this was probably the most exciting to watch of the series we've watched so far, even if it wasn't particularly close throughout most of it.
No, it was fun. It was more fun to watch. It kind of, like we said, it kind of looked more like traces of the modern NBA.
Mm-hmm.
In these series and the series that I watched. So, yeah, it's now it's time for change. The NBA starts to really amp up in the 80s, so we're going into the 80s, baby.
That's like we talked about with the talent jump that you really see in the 80s. But this time around, we got the revenge tour of the Seattle SuperSonics, who take home their, to date, only NBA championship. Will there be another one? Maybe. We'll see if Seattle comes back, as we predict, in the near future, and maybe gets competitive again. We'll see. See how that works out.
Hopefully they don't pull a Cleveland Browns where the real Browns are the Ravens, and the Ravens remain competitive, and these Browns are god awful. So.
Exactly.
That's what I'm scared of if Seattle comes back.
As far as I feel like that's kind of the Hornets with the NBA, though, right? Like they were the Charlotte Hornets. They became the Charlotte Bobcat, or they moved to New Orleans, became the New Orleans Hornets. Charlotte got a team called the Bobcats, and then they renamed the Hornets as soon as the Hornets changed their name.
Yeah.
Right? And the Hornets are still terrible, like the actual Hornets.
Yeah.
And will continue to be terrible probably for a long time, because that roster is not built in a way that is going to become successful anytime soon. But a quick summary of this NBA Finals that we're talking about. Dennis Johnson took home the Finals MVP. He averaged 22.6 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists in the contest. Obviously, we talked about how much of an impact he made in the game also on the defensive end. Gus Williams was the leading scorer of the series, the other of the two guards. He averaged 28.6 points per game throughout the series. Jack Sikma at over 14 rebounds and 16 points per game, 3 blocks per game as well in this series. So the kind of big three there of the Sonics coming through to win. The Sonics, the only championship won in the Western Conference in the last 4 or 5 decades that was not by a team from Texas or a team from California.